Sometime in 1967, deep in the mountains of Vietnam, a U.S. Marine began to feel something strange. At first, it wasn't alarming, not pain like a bullet wound, not the sharp sting of shrapnel, not even the deep exhaustion that came from marching for hours under crushing heat. It was something quieter, a burning sensation, deep inside his body, easy to ignore because in Vietnam everything hurt. Your shoulders ached under the weight of your gear, your legs trembled from constant movement, your skin burned from sweat and friction. Pain was normal, but this was different. This didn't go away. It got worse. The burning turned into something sharper, something invasive, something that didn't belong. By the time medics reached him, the situation had escalated beyond anything they expected. And what they found didn't look like war. It looked like something out of a horror story. A leech, a living, blood-feeding parasite, had entered his body. Not attached to his leg, not feeding from his arm, but inside him. It had crawled into his urethra, alive, feeding, growing. The Marine wasn't evacuated because of enemy fire, not because of a sniper, not because of a landmine, but because the jungle had found a way inside his body. And that was the part most people don't understand about Vietnam. This wasn't a rare, one-in-a-million accident. Writers like Karl Marlantes opened their stories with moments like this because they were real, because they had happened, more than once. Because before you ever saw the enemy, before you ever fired your weapon, the jungle had already begun to attack you. This was not a war where the battlefield waited for you. The battlefield moved, it breathed, it hunted. And it didn't need bullets to do it. The air itself was hostile, every breath carried risk. Mosquitoes drifted silently through the thick humidity, invisible in the dim light, landing on exposed skin without warning. Each bite was small, almost insignificant. But inside those bites lived something far more dangerous than pain, parasites that caused malaria, a disease that could cripple you with fever, chills, and exhaustion so severe you could barely stand. The water didn't help. It looked harmless. Streams running through green landscapes, rivers cutting through dense forest. But inside that water lived microscopic threats, parasites that entered your body without permission, without resistance. You drank to survive, and in doing so you invited something else inside you. Even the ground beneath your feet wasn't safe. It stayed wet, always, mud that never dried, soil that shifted and softened with every step. Your boots sank into it. Your socks soaked through. Your skin stayed trapped in moisture hour after hour, day after day. At first it was just discomfort, then blisters, then cracks, then something worse. The skin began to break down, to peel, to rot. A condition soldiers called jungle rot or immersion foot. Your own body, your feet, the very thing keeping you moving, started to fail you. Not because of combat, but because the environment refused to let you stay whole. And then there was the jungle itself. Because Vietnam wasn't just covered in trees. It was layered, built like a living fortress. At the very top stood massive trees, towering giants rising 150 to 250 feet into the sky. Their branches stretched outward like a protective shield, catching sunlight before it could reach anything below. Underneath that was the main canopy, a dense, interlocking ceiling of branches and leaves so tightly packed that it formed a continuous roof over the jungle. And below that, where you walked, was chaos, the understory, a suffocating tangle of bamboo, saplings, vines, thorns, and creeping plants that seemed designed to stop you from moving. Nothing was clear, nothing was open, everything resisted you. Soldiers gave those vines a name, wait-a-minute vines. Because that's exactly what they forced you to do, every few steps. You got caught, your rifle sling snagged, your backpack pulled back, your sleeves tangled, and every time you had to stop. Untangle, move again, only to be stopped again seconds later. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was mental. A constant interruption that broke your rhythm, your focus, your patience, until even walking became a battle. And then there was the light, or more accurately, the lack of it. Only about 2% of sunlight made it through all those layers. 2%. At ground level in the middle of the day, you weren't standing in sunlight. You were standing in shadow. In dim green darkness. Visibility dropped to 10, maybe 15 feet. That's it. Anything beyond that distance simply disappeared into the jungle, which meant the enemy didn't have to hide far away. They could be close, very close. Watching you, waiting, close enough to hear you breathe, close enough to count the buttons on your uniform, and you would never see them. Even your equipment began to fail you. Smoke grenades used to signal helicopters couldn't rise through the dense canopy above. The smoke just spread sideways, trapped beneath the layers of leaves. Radios struggled. The thick vegetation and heavy moisture interfered with signals, cutting communication at the worst possible moments. You could be separated from your unit by only a short distance, and still feel completely isolated, completely cut off. Then came the heat, relentless. Temperatures pushed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity stayed above 90%. Your body didn't cool down, it couldn't. Sweat didn't evaporate, it just stayed on your skin, soaking your clothes, dripping constantly. Your uniform was never dry, your boots were never dry, your body was never dry, and all the while you carried weight, heavy weight. 60, 80, sometimes over 100 pounds of equipment strapped to your body. Weapons, ammunition, water, food, tools, everything you needed to survive, everything that made moving harder. Progress through the jungle wasn't measured in miles. It wasn't even measured in hours. Sometimes an entire day of movement got you only a few hundred meters forward. That's how dense it was. That's how slow it became. The soldier at the front, the point man, had the hardest job, cutting through vegetation, clearing a path, and every 15 to 30 minutes. He collapsed, heat exhaustion, fatigue, complete physical shutdown. They had to rotate constantly. Because no one could handle it for long, and the jungle still wasn't finished. Because then came the rain, heavy, unforgiving, endless. In some regions, over 150 inches fell every year, not occasional storms, not brief showers, but sustained, overwhelming rainfall that soaked everything. The ground flooded, paths disappeared, movement became even harder, everything became heavier, slower, more exhausting. And this is the part most people miss. None of this involved the enemy. No gunfire, no explosions, no ambushes, just the jungle breaking you down, piece by piece. This was the reality of Vietnam. You weren't just fighting soldiers. You were fighting an entire environment designed to wear you down, infect you, exhaust you, and weaken you before the real battle even began. The jungle didn't need weapons. It didn't need strategy. It just needed time. And that's why you, the person listening right now, wouldn't last a week, because before you ever saw the enemy, the jungle would already be inside you. If the jungle didn't break your body in the first few days, it started to infect it, quietly, slowly, relentlessly. Because in Vietnam, the greatest threat wasn't always the enemy you could see. It was the one already inside you. By the late 1960s, U.S. military records revealed something that should have been impossible in a modern war. Nearly 69% of all hospital admissions weren't caused by combat. Not bullets, not explosions, not ambushes, disease. The jungle itself was sending more soldiers to hospital beds than the Viet Cong ever could. Think about that. You were 4 times more likely to be taken out by illness than by enemy fire. At the center of it all was malaria. It didn't arrive dramatically. No loud moment. No warning, just a bite. A single mosquito landing on your skin in the humid darkness, feeding for a few seconds, and leaving behind something far worse than an itch. At first, you might not even notice. Then the fever began. It came in waves. Violent chills that made your body shake uncontrollably, even in 100-degree heat. Sweat pouring out of you, head pounding. Muscles collapsing under exhaustion. Some soldiers described it as feeling like their bones were breaking from the inside. And when it hit, you were done, you couldn't march, you couldn't fight. Sometimes you couldn't even stand. The military issued anti-malarial pills. Chloroquine, Primaquine, taken regularly, supposed to protect you. But Vietnam had its own version of malaria, a strain, Plasmodium falciparum, that didn't always respond to those drugs. Meaning the pills you depended on sometimes didn't work. And the men most exposed, the infantry, the ones walking through the jungle every day, they made up a small portion of total forces, but took the majority of malaria cases, because they were the ones being bitten, again and again and again. But malaria wasn't alone, it never was. Your stomach was next, because everything you consumed came with consequences: food, water, even your own hands. Bacteria spread easily in the heat, in the moisture, and the constant filth of jungle conditions. Diarrheal diseases became routine, not occasional, constant. Entire units suffered from it at the same time, losing fluids, losing energy. Losing strength they couldn't afford to lose. And it didn't matter how disciplined you were, how careful you tried to be, you were living in it, sleeping in it, walking through it. There was no clean, only less dirty. Skin infections followed. Because your body never dried, ever. Your clothes stayed soaked, your boots stayed wet. Your skin stayed trapped in heat and moisture for days at a time. Fungal infections spread rapidly. Bacterial infections followed. Small cuts turned into open sores. Insects bit into already damaged skin, and those wounds didn't heal properly. They worsened. They expanded. Some turned into what soldiers called tropical ulcers. Deep, painful wounds that ate into flesh and took weeks or months to recover from. And then came hepatitis, a viral infection that attacked the liver, spread through contaminated food and water. It drained your energy, left you weak, unable to function. Thousands of soldiers were pulled from duty because of it, not wounded. Not shot, just unable to continue, and sometimes they didn't even know what was wrong. A huge number of cases were labeled simply as fever of unknown origin. No clear cause, no clear treatment, just symptoms, fever, fatigue, weakness, and uncertainty. But one of the most disturbing realities of Vietnam didn't show itself immediately. It waited. Parasites entered soldiers' bodies through water, food, and skin contact. Some of them stayed, hidden, silent, living inside the body for years, even decades. One of them, the liver fluke, could live inside the bile ducts for 20 to 25 years. No symptoms, no warning, just time, and then one day. It caused cancer, long after the war ended, long after soldiers returned home, long after they thought they had survived. The jungle came back. This is what made Vietnam different. You didn't just fight it while you were there. It followed you, inside your blood, inside your organs, inside your future, and all of this was happening while you were still expected to fight, to march, to carry your gear, to stay alert, to survive ambushes, to operate as a soldier. You were exhausted, dehydrated, infected, sleep-deprived, and still moving forward through one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Because the jungle didn't pause, it didn't care, it didn't give you time to recover. It kept attacking, every hour, every day, every step. And this is the part people don't think about. War is supposed to be about enemies, about strategy, about battles, but in Vietnam, you could go days, weeks, without even seeing the enemy, and still be losing. Because the jungle was already winning. And if the disease didn't take you, something else was waiting. If the heat didn't break you, if the disease didn't weaken you, then something else was waiting, something alive. Because Vietnam wasn't just dangerous because of terrain or illness. It was dangerous because everything in it was trying to survive. And to survive, it had to feed. The jungle wasn't quiet. It only felt that way at first. But the longer you stayed, the more you realized. You were surrounded by movement, by sound, by things you couldn't see. More than 200 species of snakes lived in Vietnam, dozens of them venomous and unlike you. They belonged there. They didn't struggle through the jungle. They moved through it effortlessly, silently, perfectly adapted. One of the most feared was the bamboo pit viper, bright green, almost invisible against the leaves, resting on branches just above eye level. Waiting, not hunting you, not chasing you, just waiting for you to come too close, and when you did, it struck fast enough that you barely registered movement. Its venom attacked your blood, causing swelling, tissue damage, intense pain. Soldiers gave it a nickname, the two-step snake, because they believed, after it bit you, you'd only take 2 steps before collapsing. That wasn't always true, but the pain, the fear, that part was real. Then there was the Malayan kite. It moved at night, when visibility was already gone, when you were already exhausted. Its venom attacked your nervous system, paralyzing, silent, deadly. Untreated, it could kill in the majority of cases, and the worst part, its bite often didn't hurt much. You might not even realize what had happened, until your body started shutting down. And then there was the king cobra, up to 13 feet long, capable of lifting part of its body off the ground, looking you in the eye, delivering more venom in a single bite than almost any other snake on Earth. They didn't just stay deep in the jungle. They appeared where you least expected them. Inside camps, near supplies, sometimes even inside helicopters. Coiled, waiting, but snakes weren't the only problem, not even close. Leeches were everywhere, on land, in water, in leaves, in mud. They didn't wait, they found you. Drawn by heat, by movement, by the simple fact that you existed, you'd be walking and not feel anything at first. Then you'd look down and see them, attached, swollen, feeding, your blood running into their bodies, sometimes dozens at a time. Crawling into boots, under clothing, into places you couldn't easily reach, and sometimes they went further. Stories spread among soldiers about leeches entering the body, through openings no one wanted to think about. And those stories weren't just rumors. They happened, just like the Marine from earlier. Removing them wasn't easy. Pulling them off could leave parts behind. So soldiers burned them with cigarettes, with heat, with whatever they had. And even that wasn't the end. because the jungle had much more giant centipedes up to 8 inches long, fast, aggressive. Their bites caused intense pain, swelling, and infection. Forest scorpions, large, dark, hiding under gear, inside boots, beneath anything left on the ground. One careless moment, one hand placed in the wrong spot, and you paid for it. Then came the ants, weaver ants, living in the trees above you, thousands of them. Sometimes tens of thousands. All it took was disturbing a branch. A slight movement, a brush against leaves, and suddenly, they were everywhere, crawling down, biting, swarming over your arms, your neck, your face. Soldiers called them communist ants, because once they attacked, they didn't stop. And then there were the animals that didn't just bite. They hunted. In the Mekong Delta, saltwater crocodiles moved silently through the water, massive, powerful, invisible beneath the surface, waiting. In the dense jungle, tigers still existed, not symbols, not myths, real predators, watching, learning. In one case, a tiger stalked a marine reconnaissance team. It attacked, dragged one man away by the neck. And when they tracked it down, they discovered something worse. It had already killed before. Another marine, weeks earlier in the same area. That meant one thing: the tiger wasn't just reacting, it was hunting humans. And all of this was happening while you were already exhausted, already sick, already struggling to move through the jungle. You couldn't relax. You couldn't let your guard down, not even for a moment. Because danger didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. Above you, below you, around you, inside you. You weren't just a soldier in Vietnam. You were part of the environment, a source of heat, a source of movement, a source of blood, and everything in that jungle was designed to take advantage of that. This is what made it different. This is what made it overwhelming. You couldn't shoot most of these threats. You couldn't fight them in the way you were trained to fight. There was no clear enemy, no clear target, just constant pressure, constant risk, constant awareness that at any moment, something could crawl onto you, bite you, poison you, or start feeding on you. And if somehow you survived all of that, if the jungle didn't infect you, didn't poison you, didn't eat you alive, then you still had to face the one thing that made everything worse: the ground itself. If the jungle above you didn't get you, if the insects, the snakes, the disease somehow failed, then the ground beneath your feet was waiting. Because in Vietnam, the enemy didn't just fight you. They reshaped the battlefield itself. They turned the earth into a weapon. And the most dangerous part, you couldn't see it, every step you took, was a decision, a risk, a gamble you didn't even know you were making. The jungle floor looked normal: mud, leaves, roots. Nothing unusual, nothing obvious, but underneath, it had been prepared. One of the most common traps was deceptively simple: punji sticks, sharpened bamboo stakes, fire-hardened to increase durability. Placed inside concealed pits, you'd be walking forward, focused on the terrain ahead, trying not to trip, not to fall, and suddenly the ground disappeared. Your leg dropped, and pain exploded because the pit wasn't empty. It was filled with spikes, angled downward, so when your weight drove your leg in, pulling it back out didn't help, it made it worse. The spikes dug deeper, tore more flesh, trapped you, and they weren't clean. That was the point. They were often coated in filth, human waste, rot, anything that could cause infection. The goal wasn't always to kill you. Sometimes it was worse: to injure you, slow you down, force your unit to stop, to carry you, to drain time, energy, and morale. Some pits were designed with extra cruelty: side panels that collapsed inward, closing around your leg, locking it in place, making escape nearly impossible without causing more damage. And then there were secondary traps, because the first victim wasn't always the only target. Nearby, another pit waited for the soldier who rushed forward to help. This is what made it terrifying. It wasn't just danger, it was uncertainty. Every single step might be the one, and that kind of pressure, over days, weeks, months, did something to your mind. You stopped trusting the ground. You stopped trusting your own movement. You questioned every step, every path, every decision. And the jungle used that against you, because punji sticks were only the beginning. The next layer was explosives, simple, effective, hidden. Tripwire grenades were everywhere. A grenade, already armed, placed inside a small container, held in place by pressure, connected to a thin wire stretched across a path. You walked forward. Your boot caught the wire. You didn't even notice it, but the grenade did. The pin was already gone. The only thing holding it safe was pressure. And the moment it moved, the mechanism released. Sometimes there was a delay, sometimes there was no warning, no time to react, just an explosion. And here's what made it worse. More than half of all these traps were only discovered when they detonated, not spotted, not avoided, triggered. That means most of the time. The first sign a trap existed was the moment it went off. Metal detectors almost useless. They detected only a tiny fraction, because many traps weren't made of metal. They were made from bamboo, from scrap, from whatever was available, like the toe popper. One of the simplest devices, and one of the most effective, a bullet casing. Gunpowder packed inside. Scrap metal added for damage, sealed, placed in a small tube under your foot when you stepped on it. Your weight drove a nail or pin into the primer, and it exploded, not always killing you, but destroying your foot. Your leg, your ability to walk, and again. That was enough, because every injured soldier meant more men carrying him, more resources used, more pressure added. And the materials, they were everywhere, because the battlefield was full of them. Unexploded bombs, discarded ammunition, spent casings, even trash. Everything could be reused, everything could become a weapon, even American weapons. The M16 anti-personnel mine, known as the Bouncing Betty. Originally placed by U.S. forces. Recovered, reused, turned back against them, when triggered. It didn't explode immediately, it launched upward, to waist height, then detonated, sending fragments in every direction. A full circle of destruction. You didn't just get hit, everyone around you did, and the numbers tell the story. A significant portion of casualties in Vietnam came not from direct combat, but from mines, from traps, from things hidden in the ground, in some units. It was almost all of them. Soldiers were being injured, without ever seeing the enemy, and that changed something deep inside, because how do you fight something you can't see? How do you defend against something that doesn't reveal itself until it's too late? You couldn't shoot it. You couldn't outmaneuver it. You couldn't predict it. You could only walk forward. And hope that your next step wasn't the one. And over time, that hope turned into fear. Not sudden fear, not panic, but constant, quiet pressure every step, every movement, every patrol. Your mind never rested, your body never relaxed. Because even standing still didn't guarantee safety. And beneath all of this, beneath the traps, beneath the surface itself, there was something else, something waiting, hidden even deeper. Because the jungle didn't just attack from above, or from the ground. It attacked from below. If the jungle above you didn't break you, if the ground beneath your feet didn't tear you apart, then you still hadn't reached the most unsettling part of Vietnam. Because the battlefield didn't just exist around you, it existed under you, beneath the jungle floor. Hidden from sight, ran an entire world. The tunnel systems, they weren't small, they weren't temporary, they weren't improvised, they were vast, stretching for miles beneath the surface. Layered, engineered, expanded over years long before most American soldiers ever arrived. One of the most famous networks lay near Sea Letter 1E7 Kai, over 100 miles of tunnels. 3 different levels, some reaching as deep as 8 to 12 meters underground. From above there was nothing, just jungle, trees, dirt, silence. But below, life, movement, organization. Entire communities existed down there. Sleeping areas, storage rooms, hospitals, command centers, even kitchens designed with special ventilation systems that spread smoke through long underground channels so it wouldn't rise in one visible column. You could be standing on top of it, walking across it, even building a base above it, and never know, and that actually happened. American units established positions, set up camps, lived their daily routines, directly above tunnel systems, while below them, enemy fighters listened. Moved, prepared. This wasn't just hiding, this was control. The enemy could appear anywhere, disappear instantly, strike, and vanish. There were no clear front lines, no fixed positions. No guaranteed safety, and eventually, someone had to go down there. They were called tunnel rats. Volunteers, usually smaller men because the tunnels were tight, cramped, barely wide enough to crawl through. Armed with little more than a pistol, a flashlight, and whatever courage they could hold on to. They entered the dark, alone, no backup behind them, no easy escape, no clear idea of what waited ahead. The tunnels weren't just empty passages. They were defended, booby traps, hidden pits, tripwires, poison spikes, sometimes even animals. Snakes tied inside passageways, scorpions, anything that could slow you down, or kill you. And then there were the fighters. Enemy soldiers hiding in the darkness, waiting, listening. There was no room for rifles, no space to turn, no distance to create safety. If you encountered someone down there, it became close, immediate, brutal, knife range. And all of it happened in near total darkness. Air thick, Hot, hard to breathe, your heartbeat louder than your thoughts, every sound amplified, every movement uncertain, and the worst part, you had to keep going. Because leaving the tunnels unchecked meant leaving a threat behind, a hidden force that could strike again later. So you crawled forward, inch by inch, through dirt, through darkness, through fear. Casualty rates were high. In some cases, around a third of tunnel rats were killed or wounded, and the ones who came back were never the same, because it wasn't just physical danger, it was psychological, the feeling of being trapped, the awareness that the earth itself had swallowed you, the knowledge that something could be inches away. And you wouldn't see it until it was too late. It stayed with you, and this was happening, while everything else was still going on, the jungle above, the traps below, the disease inside. You didn't get to focus on one threat, you had to live with all of them, at the same time and still. You had a job to do, you had to move, carry your gear, stay alert, follow orders. Even as your body broke down, even as your mind started to strain under constant pressure, because the system didn't stop. You were there for a fixed amount of time, 12 months, that was your rotation, and every single day. You counted, not forward, backward, days left, weeks left, months left, because survival wasn't about winning anymore. It was about lasting long enough to leave. Soldiers tracked their time obsessively, marking calendars, counting days, waiting. And something changed when the number got smaller. When it dropped below 100 days, it became real, close, within reach. And that's when fear changed. You became more cautious, more careful, less willing to take risks. Because now, you had something to lose, not just your life, but your way out, and the system made it worse. Soldiers didn't rotate out as units. They rotated individually, which meant new men arrived constantly, inexperienced, unfamiliar, unprepared, and experienced soldiers left, taking knowledge with them, breaking cohesion, breaking trust. New arrivals had a name, FNG. And many veterans didn't even bother learning their names, not out of cruelty, out of practicality, because too often, they didn't last. Casualty statistics showed a harsh reality. A large percentage of those wounded or killed were new, which meant forming connections, meant risking loss again and again. So distance became protection. Emotionally, mentally, and all of this built pressure, not sudden, not explosive, but constant. A slow, grinding weight from the jungle, from the enemy, from the environment, from the system itself. Until eventually, something gave, discipline weakened, judgment blurred, stress accumulated, because humans aren't built to live like that, not for weeks, not for months. And yet, in Vietnam, they had to, because the jungle didn't stop. The war didn't stop, and time moved slower than it ever had before. And even if you survived all of it, the jungle still had one final way to reach you, long after you left. By the time you reached the end of your tour in Vietnam, you're not the same person who arrived. You came in young, maybe 22, maybe younger, trained, prepared at least on paper, taught how to fight, how to shoot, how to survive a battlefield. But Vietnam wasn't the battlefield you were trained for, because no amount of training prepared you for the heat that never left, the moisture that never dried, the insects that never stopped, the fear that never turned off. You didn't just fight the enemy. You endured the environment for 12 months, carrying 60 to 100 pounds of gear through jungle that barely let you move, sleeping a few hours at a time, waking up again, patrolling again, repeating it again. Your rifle rusted, your clothes rotted, your body broke down, your feet stayed wet for days, your skin cracked, your legs developed infections that never fully healed. Mosquito bites covered your arms and neck. Leeches found you, again and again. You drank water that tasted like chemicals, because it had to be purified, and even that caused problems, stomach issues, dehydration, weakness. You were constantly balancing survival against survival. Drink water and risk illness. Don't drink and collapse from dehydration. Even eating wasn't normal. You carried rations, heavy, canned, repetitive. Some meals became favorites. Others were avoided completely, not because they were dangerous, but because they felt unlucky. Because in a place like that, even small beliefs started to matter. Heating food meant improvisation. Sometimes using materials never meant for that purpose. Even explosives, carefully, because in Vietnam, you used whatever worked, and all the while, you carried more than just weight. You carried stress, fear, fatigue. You carried the knowledge that danger wasn't predictable, that it could come from anywhere, at any time, and over time. That changes how you think, because war is supposed to have structure. Front lines, clear enemies, defined battles. Vietnam didn't. You could go days without seeing the enemy. Then suddenly, everything happened at once. Ambush, close range, confusion, the enemy chose when to fight, where to fight, how to fight, they knew the jungle, you didn't. And that imbalance mattered, because while you were trying to survive the environment, they were using it, but even then, even after all of that, the war still wasn't finished with you. Because in an attempt to control the jungle, to remove cover, to expose enemy positions, something else was introduced: chemicals. Massive amounts of herbicides were sprayed across forests, rivers, and farmland, one of the most well-known. Agent Orange, it wasn't just clearing vegetation. It was changing the environment itself, killing trees, destroying crops, altering entire regions, but it didn't stop there, because those chemicals didn't stay on plants. They didn't stay in the soil. They entered the body, through skin, through air, through water, and once inside. They stayed, the compound within it, dioxin, was extremely toxic. It didn't break down easily, it didn't leave quickly, it remained. Accumulating over time, and years later, sometimes decades later, the effects began to appear. Illnesses, diseases, conditions that weren't visible during the war, but were connected to it. For many veterans, the war didn't end when they left Vietnam. It continued. Inside their bodies, some developed cancers, others suffered chronic conditions, health problems that followed them long after the fighting stopped. And it wasn't only soldiers. Millions of Vietnamese civilians were exposed as well, communities affected, generations impacted. The jungle had been attacked, but in doing so, everything living within it was affected. And even today, decades later, traces remain, in soil, in water, in people. The war left marks that didn't disappear, and that brings us back to you. You arrive in Vietnam, young, inexperienced. Within days, the jungle begins to change you. Your body struggles, your mind adjusts, your expectations collapse, you learn quickly. Or you don't last. You move through terrain where you can barely see. You carry weight that never gets lighter. You sleep less than you need. You trust less than you want to. You step carefully, because the ground might not be safe. You listen constantly, because the enemy might be near. You endure things that don't feel survivable. And if you make it through, if you last the full 12 months, if you leave, you don't leave everything behind. Because Vietnam doesn't stay in Vietnam. It stays with you, in memories, in habits, in reactions, in the way you think. The way you sleep, the way you remember, and sometimes, in ways you don't even realize. Over 25 million Americans served in Vietnam. More than 58,000 never came home. Hundreds of thousands were wounded. Many more carried something invisible, physical, psychological, and the truth is, the jungle didn't choose sides. It affected everyone. American, Vietnamese, soldier, civilian. It demanded something from anyone who entered it. A war fought with weapons. It was a war fought against an environment, against conditions that broke the human body and mind. And in the end, that's why you wouldn't last a week. Not because you're weak, not because you're untrained, but because Vietnam wasn't something you simply fought. It was something you had to survive, and even then, it didn't always let you go.